Mhm.
Okay, this is June the 5th and we are rolling. And I'm getting lots of good papers. I think I have almost every two. I think there's 1, 2 out. And threes are looking good. We were just talking about three in the fact that when you read the description, there's something left out. The teaching and learning heading is not in the, I've got it right here. In task 3, the description does not include teaching and learning, but when you go over to emerging, developing, and proficient, they're in there. And I've had a couple of people that didn't put it in, and I think they were making their headings from the description and not from the proficient column, which I can understand that. And that's why I said put that in.
Dr. Tillman, can you say that again? You were kind of cutting out and I missed the part about what you said people are missing in their paper.
Okay, in task 3, on the description on the rubric page, it does not list a heading called teaching and learning. But when you go across and get to the proficient column, it does require you to discuss that. So I just wanted to make sure, because I think I've had 3 people that didn't put it in, and I understand why they didn't if they made their headings from the description page. Okay, so let's just quickly review CAAP 3. We've got our mission and vision, and I think everybody did fine with that. School leadership, you want to make sure, some of you in the teacher quality, you went on and on about interviewing teachers and hiring teachers and all that, and actually the only thing that belongs there is the experience and the qualifications, you know, how long they've worked and degrees and national boards, those kinds of things. The teaching and learning, and we just talked about that it's not in the description, but it's on the rubric. Parental involvement, you might even think about what you did back when you were doing the communication piece and the things that were going on related to that. The conflict resolution, some people had a little trouble figuring out what to do with that. And I think if a lot of you from the very beginning, I know the people I had back in 601 just wanted to get into that discipline stuff because it's such a naughty kind of issue that intertwines with teaching and learning. Well, this is a good place for you to go to the teacher working conditions survey, pull out that discipline stuff and talk about conflict resolution because you've got some good data there. And the place that takes care of the student conflicts, but what about teacher conflicts or teacher administration conflicts? Those you can go to, say, the board policy manual. That would be a good place. The teacher handbook might have something about conflict resolution there, probably called the grievance policy, but it still translates into conflict resolution. So that would be something I would definitely consider there. And the student achievement, and of course that's the EVOS data, the EOGs, the EOCs, whatever, depending on your grade level. And then the recommendations. And because this is the cultural piece, this piece probably more than any other, you need to make sure you hit the collaboration, how you tried to get data from as many people as you could, how you looked at it, you looked to see again because situations change. You're really trying to have the reader see that you probed as much as you could to find out what's really beneath the surface that's causing people to feel almost across the board that they don't feel trusted and secure basically in their jobs. based on their relationship with their administrator. That sort of comes across in a lot of your writing. And so that seems to be a big piece. And this is the place, the cultural piece is where, you want to focus on that collaboration, your committee, of course, but beyond the committee, that you really pulled in a lot of information from your people. Did you have any questions about 3? I want to move on, but I want to make sure we have 3. Usually 3, when I get 3, it's either really, really right on or it's off track. And there's very few of the off tracks. I think you're really getting it. Okay, CAAP 4. Now, CAAP 4 is just like all the other times when you were doing action plans or marketing plans. You've got to have a narrative. The narrative must address what's in the graphic organizer. Okay, that's just the way research papers look. You have to do the analysis in a narrative. You want to emphasize, as I said, continue that emphasis on collaboration as far as the data collection, the input you got, the final decision making. Don't say, which some of you are saying, I decided or the candidate decided. Hopefully it is not you making the total decision. So be careful, because all you need to do is say that one time in your paper, and you've skewed the paper away from collaboration. So, it's really a touchy issue, especially with the CAAP, because it's supposed to be collaborative, building culture, and improving the working environment. And you can't do a lot about the fact you have a small building, that you have too many students, that you don't have enough custodial help. There's a lot of that you can't do anything about. So you've got to find the things you can do something about so that people feel appreciated and trusted. That's a really important piece to me, that a lot of your teachers don't feel trusted. I would feel very concerned if that were my school. Strategies for achieving an improvement in the cultural working conditions. You want to make sure that your strategies all focus on that, and use the data you've collected from the first, second, and third piece, so that it flows. Remember, this is one big paper that you're writing. You've written it in pieces, but this piece is the culmination. So don't just throw out 1, 2, and 3 and start pulling in other ideas that didn't come from the data, didn't come from anything that any teacher said. I mean, you really should not have new stuff in this, because this is supposed to just graphically represent what you have already decided. Okay. Make sure that somewhere you reference your mission and vision statement, because that's so important to the culture of your school. Reference improved feelings of well-being. That's what you're really trying to get, is you want people to feel that this is their place. I think that you probably discussed it the other night in class, that you can have 2 school systems side by side, and one can pay more than another. And people will move from one to another. There we are. Can you see me now? Okay, my screen went blank. It was like, I'm not sure what happened to my connection. But for example, I have a friend whose daughter taught in Guilford County for a while, and she began to feel so pushed and pressured that she took, you can't hear? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. she took a position making less money in the county next door because...
You're cutting in and out.
You're breaking up, Dr. Tillman.
Oh, I am so sorry. I'm not sure what's happening. I'm on my same computer. Okay. The example I was giving was that I have a friend whose daughter, a really good teacher, taught in Guilford County, and she was feeling so stressed with a new principal that came. She taught for that person for 2 years, and the next thing I knew, she was traveling 22 miles to the neighboring county and taking less money. And she's been teaching there for the last, 12 or 13 years. And she's just as happy as a little clam. And she feels that she's making a difference. She feels she's respected. She has some positions. She's on the school improvement team, and she gets to do some staff development sometimes. And she won't consider coming back. So, the culture is key. And so that's one of the things that we don't talk about maybe as much as we should, because it makes a difference in hiring people. And I read in one of your papers, you were talking about a high turnover rate and all of the training that goes into getting a teacher into the culture of your school. And this high turnover rate, you're just constantly training new people. And you need to figure out why that is and take action to stop it. You need to try to reference diversity in your paper. Make sure that you're addressing that, because the diversity issue is right here in the culture. If that's a problem in your school, it's deep rooted, and it's going to take a lot of effort to get people to feel that they are a part of the system and that they're needed and wanted in the system. And of course, the conflict resolution stuff, make sure that you are addressing that, because discipline issues can really shadow and turn things less than bright in a school if you can't get a hold of that. And you need parents to help you, you need the students to help you, you need to be involved in helping. So, okay.
Dr. Tillman, in the CAAP 4, when we're doing our graphic organizer, I don't know if I did this right, but what I used for an indicator of success is I looked back in the rubric and used some of the language about collaboration and diversity and all that, and used those kind of phrases as part of my indicators for success, or as a goal for whatever we were doing. Is that okay to go from that? That way it's integrated in there that this is collaborative, it's about the culture, it's about the climate. Am I on the right track with that?
Yes, you are. And that's really what needs to happen. The language of culture that you have developed through working with these projects, that language needs to become part of your paper. It needs to become part of your discussion with your teachers and with those with whom you work. Collaboration it's really, it's the heart and soul of trying to get people to work together. I sent you, I think, a sample. Did you have a question? Did someone have a question?
I did. Saquanda here. Go ahead and finish what you were saying. I can ask my question when you finish.
Well, it's fine. You go ahead, because it may be something that we can deal with before.
You made mention about diversity and talking about that. How far down should we go? I work at a newly, I guess, an up-and-coming affluent community, but there's a lack of diversity as far as teachers and administrators and staff of color, but that's representative of the community. Should I go as far down as teacher preparation programs also not being diverse, or just talk about Just
I would
because
think right at the school level. I think there are efforts being made for diversity at the college level, but I think the higher is where we need to really put a focus. And I think I've probably talked about this before, but I think it's very important that when we, if you're putting diversity in the school, that you choose those examples very carefully, so that they're breaking stereotypes every day they step into the classroom and do a good job. If that makes sense to you. You know, we want, and I know that doesn't sound fair, but you know, sometimes the world isn't fair. And I would just say, when I go into a classroom, if I'm in a high profile school like you're talking about, and 97% of the students are, you know, white, parents are college educated, you know, this kind of a school. And I'm trying to add to diversity, whether it's Hispanic, African American, I don't care, whichever. I'm going to look for the very best example I can find. And as I said, that may not sound fair, but I'm going to look for somebody that will come into my school and do such a bang-up job that no child that they deal with will ever say that a person of color can't do, because they've seen it day after day after day, and that person has cared for them, that person has advocated for them, and that's what I think is important about diversity. And there are people that will argue with me. I have had a board member tell me that if the person's file is in the county office and they are certified by the state, then they are just as capable as any other person in the file. And I think we all can agree that that may not be correct. So you just have to pick your battles and do the best you can with that one. But diversity is an important issue, and it's got to be approached from a lot of different angles, and we can't make excuses. There are good people out there. We just need to find them. And sometimes you have to go down there and look through that file yourself, because if you say, send me 5 names, they may not send you the 5 names you'd like to see. So I don't know.
I'm still not understanding that. I'm in the same situation as Ms. Turner there. We have 125 plus or minus teachers, 1 Asian, 5 blacks, and all white after that. So how am I to address this? What are you looking for in this? I'm not understanding. Maybe I'm just slow.
Well, I just think you just need to talk about the importance of that, and maybe just address the fact that we need to try to improve the diversity issue in order to meet the needs of our children. And when I say, now I may be getting into some real issues here that you don't want to hear about, and I might get in trouble, but I will say that we're not hiring teachers to meet a percentage. We're hiring teachers to do more than get good test scores. We're hiring them to improve society. And I just take it as my job that I showcase people that are diverse. I had a teacher that taught science for me that had rheumatoid arthritis, and he was a young man. His dad taught at Duke, and he had knees, hips, shoulders replaced, and he was only like 24/5. And I hired him. And I hired him because he was the best person for the job. And it was probably the first time any of those students that took advanced biology under him had ever dealt with a handicapped teacher. But that's diversity. And I think all of the students who worked with him throughout the school understood that he was really a bright guy and the body didn't matter. You know, he walked with 2 canes, the kind that go up all the way on the arms, you know, but he was a powerhouse. And so that's diversity also. You know, so we just want to develop in our students, and therefore we have to develop in ourselves acceptance of the other. And so just making people aware that we need to always be looking to improve that diversity and acceptance. I think that's all you can do in a high-powered school.
Okay, so in our paper, then we will just address the lack of diversity we have and make suggestions that we should probably start looking at this, hiring other people from other cultures or abilities. Not trying to think how I put this. I was in interviews for an administrative position for our school. Sat through interviews all day, and we had a Latin guy come in who was very charismatic and energetic. And when he left, our discussion was, well, he would definitely reach the Latin population. Might be a good addition, something like that.
Yes.
We didn't hire him; we hired someone else. But
Yeah.
But is that what you're talking about? Something like that we can get? We need to get more people in there that can reach these different populations or people with different abilities.
Yeah. And since you know how to Zoom, you can actually if you can find people in that infamous file down at the central office HR, if they let you do that anymore, I could go down and just sit down there and read those files until I found the person I wanted. So didn't always get them, but at least I had that option. And if you do have that option, spending some time looking can really be helpful, especially with Zoom, because you can do an initial Zoom and decide if that person if it's worth having them travel 2 or 3 hours or whatever it is to come and interview. So, yeah, diversity. Okay, I sent you, I think, a sample graphic organizer chart. And the chart that I sent is not something that you may have to fill in everything to meet the rubric for this. But I sent it because I think this is the kind of a format that will be easy for you to use when you get to the SIAP. When you get to evidence 6, that's when you're going to pull all these evidences together that you have been working on since 601. And I've been trying really hard to get you to use the same format so you had the information you needed when you got to evidence 6. And so that's what I sent you. And I would say you don't have to use that format. It's not like if you don't use this format, you're not going to be accepted. There's lots of formats for school improvement plans. So however you want to do it. But this is the format that has been acceptable by the evaluators simply because it's easy for them to see that you did the work. And so I suggest that you think about this. The goal is in a different place than where Dr. Lamb had it. I think when, at the beginning of this semester, I think he showed you a format for the plan. And I think he put the goal over at the far right next to the indicators of success. I think that's where he put it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's okay. But what I've found in the past is that people have a terrible time getting it to fit on the paper. And that's why I suggest that you put the goal statement above the activities that go with that goal. And if that's confusing to you, you may format this in any way you choose. But I've had some success with people doing this. And, I've had success with people doing it in other ways too. But this seems to be something that makes it pretty easy, and it gives you a little more writing room. I will say that the number one problem that you have is that you're too wordy when you get to the actual graphic organizer. Put your verbiage in the narrative, because you need to have a narrative for each of those activities. Okay? You've got to talk about it. Then when you get to the graphic organizer, the trick is to put as few words as possible and still be able to tie the narrative to the entry. Does that make sense to you, what I'm asking you to do? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let me, because I didn't do that. So you want us to have, for every activity that we list in our graphic organizer, we need to have some type of recap of that, explaining that activity. And then, so we explain all of them, and then comes the graphic organizer.
Yeah, just
like everything in it.
Yeah, just like
Okay.
when you did the student learning piece, the teacher empowerment and leadership piece, you did the narrative, talking about here's what we're going to do, and this is the data that supports it, yada, yada, yada. Not a lot here. Don't get putting too much, but you've got to talk about it, and you've got to make sure that what goes into the graphic organizer appears in the narrative. And I would say make sure that each activity's discussion is a separate paragraph, because you can just look at the paragraph, see it in the organizer, see it in the narrative, and see it in the organizer, if that makes sense.
So have headings for each one of the activities and then explain it, setting it up that way?
I think that is fine. Some people are trying to set it up by the headings they had in 3. If you think about the headings, because the headings in 3 are really where you have your activities. So it may be that your goal statement is more about the heading, and then maybe you have more than one activity to support that goal statement. Not necessarily in all cases, but it might be. I would warn against having too many activities. It's much better, as a principal, you cannot monitor a whole bunch of stuff. It's better to focus on what you're really interested in, and you just want to see it, and when you don't see it, you call it out. I don't see it.
Okay, so I hope I did this right, because I went back into tasks 1, 2, and 3, and any recommendations that I made I took those as those are activities, and all of those recommendations then ended up into my graphic organizer. Is that correct or no?
Well, maybe you did more than you really would be doing, because it depends on your school. And I'm not saying that to skirt the issue, but when you did the teacher working condition survey or the advanced ed, you came up with these recommendations for concerns. And then you resurveyed, and some of you found that what you thought was a problem is no longer a problem. And so you wouldn't want to be addressing those. So then you talked to the teachers and got their input. And some of those people told you more than they put on the survey. So you got a little different picture of the cultural problems. And so you made some recommendations there. So I would think that at task 3, those recommendations are probably the best recommendations, since they're the ones that have been able to withstand the process. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Do you suggest that we, in our narrative before the chart, if we decided not to do some of the 1s and 3s? So I think right now I have, like, for each of the 5 categories, maybe 3 or so recommendations, or 4. If we trimmed that down more, do you suggest just writing in that narrative, I decided not to, or my team decided not to do the following because? Okay.
Yes, I think that would be, it would be more realistic. Think about if this were your school and next fall you were going to be evaluated by your superintendent based on how successful you were in the goal setting from your school improvement plan as you write it at the end of the school year. Okay, so you want to make sure that what you're saying you're going to do, you can actually move forward on, because when you're in the driver's seat, you're responsible for seeing that it happens. So we don't want to throw out, we're going to do this and this. And that's why I say, make sure you have the money and make sure you have the manpower and the time. Because I had some people that were making really neat suggestions. Add another period to the day, reduce the class size. Hey, that's wonderful. But if we reduce the class size, we have to have more personnel and we have to have more building space. And it's nice to think you could just add another person, and you might, as a principal, you can fight for people, and you can sometimes convince the superintendent that you need another person, and they might give you another person, but you better show some good results with it, because they've taken that position from somebody else. There's only so many of those out there.
I have a question that goes along with this. So in our 5 categories, most of my categories have one question or one area that we needed to address. For instance, facilities. There was only one thing that they had a problem with. 34% felt like the hallways were not clean. When I re-surveyed the exact same question from the teacher working conditions, I resurveyed them, it went down to like 18%. I don't see that as a real problem. But I only have one area in facilities that I'm addressing. Can I leave that out since I don't see it as a problem? Or do I still have to, it's my only question I have in there, and we're supposed to hit all 5 categories. So what do I do here?
Well, I would think and we've sort of talked about that a little bit along. If you have really good scores, sometimes the best thing to do is to monitor and make sure that things remain as they are, because it's really tough. If you get a really high percentage on something, it's really hard to maintain it, because you're often working on something else, and it's sort of keeping all the balloons in the air at the same time. While you're working on this one sort of falls down, and then, I got to work on that,
Sure, and in reality, I understand that, but for the paper or for the narrative.
Yeah, well, for the paper, I think then you talk about the fact that it has improved, and you want to do whatever to maintain that.
Okay.
And so that would be an activity, whatever that is.
Okay.
And you may look at 3 and find that there are other areas that came up, maybe the diversity issue, for example, that you brought up, that has nothing to do with facilities, but it's an issue in your school. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be now at that one-on-one. That's how we started, that making sure that we hit all those areas because we wanted to look at all those areas.
Mm-hmm.
But you may have some issues that have come up through your work that need to be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Questions that you have about the task 4, either the narrative or the organizer.
Dr. Tillman, I hear you talking about the narrative and all of that, and what I did in 4 is probably what Carrie did also. I just put a graphic organizer. I didn't include any narrative.
Did you do that in the APSL also?
No, I didn't do it with the app. So
Did you do it in the APSL?
I didn't. But see, what happened was it was done differently with a little differently, because with this one, my CAAP 4, I took my recommendations from 3. And so in 3, when I talked about them in 3, so I was like, what else am I going to say in 4 about them? So I was just kind of like, and then I was looking at the rubric and it just said graphically display, never said narrative. So I was like, oh, I'm just supposed to do a graphic organizer because it's going to go along right with 3, because that's where all of my stuff came from. For 4 is from 3.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you need a narrative.
Okay.
And I will say, though, that if you look at that graphic organizer, I think that according to what the rubric says, as long as you basically have you know, the activity and the timeline and fill in some of that.
I have everything: the formative assessment, summative assessment, indicators of success. I have it all.
Well, that's good. But I'm just saying, I think that is more than you need to do to fulfill the proficiency in 4. But, and it's a big but, when you get to tasks in the school improvement plan, you're going to be glad that you did it, because then you'll be able to fill it all in and not have quite so much to do then. Okay. So you're not doing it because I said you needed to do it. I'm just saying that if you do it now, you won't have to do it later. How about that? And I sort of tried to do that all along, because some of the plans didn't require that you did all of the things that are listed in there. Okay. Other questions? Okay. I will say, let's see, according to what I think you have due, I think it says that you have the CAAP 4 next week. So, you know, it's moving along well. And notice that when we meet on Sunday the 9th, I changed the time to 3 o'clock. And it'll say that. I had that on the sheet, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody remembered that it was 3 o'clock. And when we meet next time, we'll be talking about the last of the big projects, and we'll hopefully do a very close reading. Those of you that teach reading, you know about close reading. Okay, close reading is what I want us to do. And I want you, there's a template. I think Dr. Lamb referred to the template. And we're gonna do some very close reading, because I don't want you to have to do that over I want you to get it done. It requires a lot of putting together, but you actually do have the information, I think. There will be very little, I think, that you really need to do if you have done everything you were supposed to do up to this point. So if you get finished with 4 and you're ready to compile the paper, remember it only has 1 heading, 1 abstract, 1 paper that seamlessly goes through the entire evidence. It has 1 reference page, it has 1 appendix, and you want to make sure that tables and figures are consecutively numbered. If you're having trouble with the difference between tables and figures, then just think about the fact that a table has to have rows and columns. And if it has rows and columns, then it must be a table. Everything else must be a figure. So that's an easy way. And I'm noticing that some of you aren't numbering the pages on your papers, and maybe that's because you don't do that until you compile, but make sure that you number the pages. You know, that's APA required. Any other questions about compiling? Because some of you are going to be ready to compile before we meet again. I'm so excited about that. I'm probably not as excited about it as you are, but I am excited about it. Any other questions?
Can I ask one question going back to the rubric on proficient and accomplished? Is talking about the graphic organizational tool displays progress towards identified goals and demonstrates the relationships between these goals and steps toward improvement. So the progress towards identified goals and demonstrates the relationships between these goals and steps toward improvement. Is that shown in the graphic organizer, or is that explained through your narrative? Does the graphic organizer take care of that part of the requirement?
I think it probably would, if you show how you're going to, if it takes, for example, professional development, and then you're going to have what that's all about, and then you're going to have implementation, and then you're going to have monitoring or whatever, you know, so that you can see how it fits together to get you to your goal.
So by having the timeline, by having stated what your, you know, who's involved, a start and ending time, what your goal is, and how you're going to be monitoring it, that should be demonstrating your progress toward that.
Yes.
Okay.
So just the fact that you're saying what the formative assessment is, and then you're saying what the summative assessment is, that should really rough it out. And the reason I was hesitant is you said, did you have to have that in the narrative? And I guess it would be in the narrative, because in the narrative you're going to say all that information. You know, you're going to tell, it's really tell them what you're going to tell them and tell them. When you get to a dissertation, there are five chapters, and really, by the time you get to the last chapter, you say, you know, I'm really having trouble saying all of this over one more time, because that's really what it is. It's tell them what you're going to do, and then do a piece of it and tell them what you were going to do and what you did and what you're going to do next, and then tell them what you did and tell them. And when you get to the end, you're just telling them from the very beginning all over again. And so you're practicing. That's a lot of that is what this is about too, is getting you to the point where you see how to logically present information and timeline and inform. So anyway, I think you're moving right along, and that it's going to happen soon, that I'm going to be seeing some final papers coming in. And you do know that your 605 professor is the person that's going to do the Turnitin. I emailed Dr. Lamb to just check and make sure he hadn't changed that from semesters before, and he said no, it's the regular professor, because the grading, see, I just do pass fail, and I love that because I can give more leeway, and I can, it's a blessing not to have to grade. And the 605, you know, they've got that grading structure, and turning that paper in and getting it through Turnitin is part of the grading structure. And by the time you get it there, it's going to be all downhill. It's just going to roll right on through. And I hope 4s for all of you. You've done some good work. Okay, other questions before we close? For the good of the group? Okay, I'm going to shut it down, and make sure you call. If you have a question, email, call. Don't do it and then say, oh, I thought that might be wrong. Call me, please. Don't do anything that is going to cause you extra work. That is not my goal for you ever. Okay, here we go.
Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.